Naomi Carter enters the executive boardroom expecting to receive the executive vice president promotion she has earned after saving the company millions. Instead, she is publicly humiliated as the position is handed to an inexperienced outsider while her own family chooses status over loyalty. Unknown to everyone, Naomi already possesses a hidden advantage that will eventually change everything. Target word count, 600. The digital clock outside the executive boardroom flashed 8:30 a.m. as I straightened the sleeve of my charcoal gray blazer. My reflection stared back at me through the polished glass. Calm. Professional. Prepared. Inside that room waited the promotion I had spent 12 years earning. Just 6 months earlier, I had led a corporate crisis that prevented a $18,742,000 contract from collapsing. 3 Fortune 500 clients stayed because I refused to let panic make decisions. Every report, every performance review, every financial projection pointed toward the same conclusion. Executive Vice President. Annual compensation, $280,000. The title wasn't simply another line on a business card. It represented every late night, every sacrifice, and every moment I had been told I needed to work twice as hard simply to be considered equal. I pushed open the boardroom door. The scent of fresh coffee drifted through the air while sunlight poured across the long walnut conference table. Around it sat board members, senior executives, legal counsel, and investors. At the head of the table sat my father, Leonard Carter, chairman of Carter Strategic Holdings. He looked at me briefly before smiling toward someone else. My younger sister, Brianna. She wore a cream-colored designer suit and the effortless confidence that came from never having to prove herself. Growing up, people constantly called her the face of the family. No one ever said that about me. Instead, they complimented my work. Never my presence. That difference followed me my entire life. "Good morning," I said quietly. Several executives nodded. Others avoided eye contact. I should have noticed. I should have understood. But I still believed merit mattered. My father stood. "I'd like to begin by recognizing Brianna for representing the Carter family with grace and elegance during this year's investor events." Applause filled the room. I kept my expression neutral. Then he continued. "And today we also welcome the future of executive leadership." The door opened. Ethan Caldwell walked inside wearing a confident smile and an expensive navy suit. He had joined the company barely 2 years earlier. I had trained him. My heartbeat slowed instead of racing. Something wasn't right. My father lifted a folder bearing the company seal. Effective immediately, Ethan Caldwell has been appointed Executive Vice President. For a moment, the room became perfectly silent. Then applause erupted again. Only this time it sounded distant. Muted. As though I were underwater. Ethan accepted the folder before shaking my father's hand. "I'm honored," he said with practiced humility. He wasn't looking at my father. He was looking directly at me. My mother finally broke the silence. "Naomi," she said softly, "family success is everyone's success." I turned toward her. She smiled. The same smile she used whenever she wanted me to accept disappointment without asking questions. I simply nodded. "I understand." Because I did. Not the promotion. The family. Across the table, Ethan leaned back in his chair. "You've always been great behind the scenes," he said. "Not everyone is meant to lead." A few uncomfortable glances shifted across the room. No one corrected him. No one defended me. They thought I had lost everything. What they didn't know was my late grandfather had prepared for this possibility years earlier. Through a confidential consulting agreement, I quietly controlled proprietary crisis management systems and client relationships worth millions of dollars. Legally, contractually, irrevocably. No one in that room knew. Not my parents. Not Brianna. Certainly not Ethan. He smiled as though he had one. I smiled back. Just enough. Because sometimes the strongest move isn't arguing. It's allowing everyone to underestimate you. They believed they had ended my career. They had absolutely no idea they had just created their strongest competitor. The family chose status over blood. Chapter summary. Naomi reflects on a lifetime of conditional love, colorism, and family favoritism, while Ethan begins using his new authority to undermine her professionally. As innocent employees suffer because of his reckless leadership, Naomi's parents demand loyalty to the family business over justice. The emotional burden finally pushes her to a life-changing realization. Target word count, 900. The morning after the promotion announcement, I arrived at the office at 7:15 a.m., exactly as I had for the past 12 years. The marble lobby reflected the city skyline through towering windows, but something felt different. Conversations stopped as I walked past. Smiles became polite nods. Respect had quietly been replaced by sympathy. People believed I had lost. They had absolutely no idea I was simply observing. I had spent most of my life watching people reveal who they truly were when power shifted. My family had mastered that lesson long before I entered corporate America. Growing up, my parents loved using one word: potential. Whenever Brianna won a beauty pageant or charmed guests at charity events, she was celebrated as the future of the Carter family. My father proudly introduced her as the daughter who carried our image. My mother admired how effortlessly she fit into every room filled with wealthy donors and politicians. I was introduced differently. This is Naomi. She's the smart one. It sounded like a compliment. It never felt like one. I remembered standing beside Brianna during family photographs while relatives adjusted the lighting around her face. Move Naomi slightly back, someone would say. The lighting is better there. Nobody mentioned my darker skin directly. They never needed to. The message was always delivered through small decisions. Through comparisons. Through silence. By the time I reached adulthood, I had learned an expensive lesson. Some people don't withhold love. They simply make you earn it forever. At 9 a.m., Ethan summoned department directors into the executive conference room. He entered carrying my strategic restructuring proposal. The same proposal I had spent 6 months developing. Without looking at me, he addressed the room. I've reviewed Naomi's recommendations, he announced. They're overly cautious. We're moving in a more aggressive direction. Several executives exchanged uncertain glances. I calmly opened my notebook. What specific risk assessment did you disagree with? I asked. Ethan smiled. The kind that slows real leaders down. A few uncomfortable laughs echoed around the table. He continued speaking before I could respond. We'll reduce operational costs immediately. That sentence sounded ordinary. The consequences were not. Within 2 weeks, Ethan approved layoffs affecting 38 employees across compliance, client relations, and internal auditing. Some had worked there longer than I had. One single mother named Denise quietly packed photographs of her children into a cardboard box without blaming anyone. A 60-year-old accountant shook my hand before leaving the building for the last time. "I hope someone eventually listens to you," he whispered. "So do I." The elevator doors closed between us. The silence stayed with me all afternoon. What Ethan called efficiency, I recognized as negligence. He ignored contractual retention clauses. He underestimated regulatory exposure. He dismissed institutional knowledge as unnecessary expense. Every decision created hidden liabilities. Every liability would eventually demand payment. The board praised him anyway. Quarterly reports temporarily looked stronger. Numbers often hide the truth. Only time exposes it. Later that afternoon, Ethan stopped beside my office. "I need those client transition files. They're still under legal review. They're under my authority now." I closed the folder in front of me. The legal department requires documented approval before transferring confidential material. His smile disappeared. "Don't confuse experience with importance, Naomi." "I never do." He leaned closer. "You have two choices." I remained silent. "You either support my leadership, or you make yourself irrelevant." His footsteps echoed down the hallway after he left. They thought intimidation created loyalty. It only created clarity. That evening my parents invited me to dinner at their estate. The dining room looked exactly as it had throughout my childhood. Crystal glasses reflected warm candlelight across polished mahogany while portraits of previous generations overlooked the table. Everything appeared elegant. Nothing felt comfortable. Halfway through dinner, my father folded his napkin. "The company needs unity." "It needs accountability," I answered calmly. He ignored my response. "Ethan represents stability. He represents appearances." My mother's voice remained soft. "Naomi, families survive because people make sacrifices. I've made sacrifices. You can make one more." I looked at both of them. "When does Brianna sacrifice?" Silence settled across the room. Finally, my father answered. "Your sister has different responsibilities." "No," I replied quietly. "She has different expectations." My mother reached across the table. "Please don't divide this family over a promotion." I almost smiled. It had never been about the promotion. It had been about 12 years of proving myself inside a family that kept moving the finish line. My father stood. "Our reputation comes before individual feelings." There it was. The truth. Not hidden. Not disguised. Simply spoken aloud. Reputation. Status. Appearance. Those came first. Fairness came later. If it came at all. I drove home through quiet streets beneath cold autumn rain. The windshield wipers moved steadily while the city lights blurred into streaks of gold and white. For the first time in years, I stopped asking myself what I could do differently. The better question was why I kept trying to earn something they had already decided not to give. That night, I stopped trying to earn their love. The file my grandfather left behind chapter summary, alone after finally accepting that her family will never choose her, Naomi reaches her emotional breaking point. A visit from her late grandfather's trusted attorney changes everything as hidden legal documents reveal the true inheritance left for her. Instead of reacting with anger, Naomi quietly prepares the first move that will reshape her future. Target word count, 850 rain tapped softly against my apartment windows as the city disappeared behind a curtain of gray. The silence inside my living room felt heavier than the storm outside. For the first time in 12 years, I had nowhere I needed to be the following morning except another meeting where my experience would be ignored. I loosened the collar of my blouse and placed my company identification badge on the kitchen counter. The plastic card looked insignificant. It had once represented everything I thought I wanted. Now it felt like a chain. I poured myself a cup of black coffee that had already gone cold. The bitter taste lingered longer than usual, but I barely noticed. My thoughts kept returning to the dinner with my parents. Their words replayed with perfect clarity. Our reputation comes before individual feelings. They hadn't even realized what they had admitted. The promotion had never been about qualifications. It had been about preserving an image. I stood beside the window overlooking downtown Chicago. Thousands of office lights still burned against the evening sky. Somewhere inside those buildings, people were still fighting for recognition, believing hard work always won. I used to believe that too. At exactly 7:42 p.m. my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, an elderly man wearing a navy overcoat offered a familiar smile. "Good evening, Naomi." "Mr. Benson." Harold Benson had been my grandfather's attorney and closest friend for more than 35 years. His silver hair had grown thinner since the funeral, but his calm eyes hadn't changed. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all." He stepped inside, carefully removing the rain from his coat before taking a leather portfolio from beneath his arm. "I promised your grandfather there would come a day when I delivered this." He placed a large sealed envelope on the dining table. Across the front, written in my grandfather's unmistakable handwriting, were 6 simple words. "For Naomi. When she's finally ready." My chest tightened. He knew this would happen? I asked quietly. Harold nodded. He didn't know when. But he knew who. I carefully broke the wax seal. Inside rested several legal documents, a small encrypted flash drive, and another handwritten letter. My hands remained steady as I unfolded the first contract. Shareholder Transfer Agreement. The effective date was nearly 8 years earlier. I continued reading. My grandfather had quietly transferred a 14.8% ownership interest in Sentinel Dynamics, a cybersecurity technology company whose proprietary crisis management software had become essential to Carter's strategic holdings. I stopped breathing for a moment. Our company depended on Sentinel's platform for nearly every major corporate client. And I was one of its largest private shareholders. What? Harold smiled gently. Your grandfather believed leadership should belong to the person who earned it. He pointed toward another folder. There's more. The second document contained consulting agreements signed years before my grandfather's death. Those agreements legally assigned several proprietary crisis response frameworks to a private consulting entity registered in my name. Every signature had been properly notarized. Every clause remained enforceable. Everything was legal. Everything had been hidden. What they didn't know, Harold said quietly, was that your grandfather spent years preparing for exactly this outcome. I picked up the flash drive. And this? His expression hardened. Evidence. I connected it to my laptop. Folders appeared across the screen. Board correspondence. Internal financial reports. Private emails. Meeting recordings. Independent audit summaries. The deeper I searched, the clearer the picture became. Ethan hadn't created the fraud. He had simply become its newest beneficiary. Several board members had concealed regulatory violations, manipulated vendor contracts, and approved misleading financial disclosures over multiple fiscal years. Millions of dollars had been disguised through consulting expenses and inflated acquisition costs. Every document was time-stamped. Every communication preserved. Every file authenticated. Harold quietly closed my laptop. You don't need revenge. I looked toward him. You need patience. For several minutes neither of us spoke. The rain continued tapping against the windows while the city lights shimmered beyond the glass. Finally, I smiled. Not because I was happy. Because I finally understood. My greatest advantage wasn't the evidence. It wasn't the ownership stake. It wasn't even the intellectual property. It was that everyone believed I had already lost. 3 days later, at exactly 8 a.m., I walked into Human Resources carrying a single envelope. Inside was my resignation. No speeches. No accusations. No dramatic exit. Ethan watched me leave with visible satisfaction. I figured you'd eventually realize this wasn't the place for you, he said. I simply nodded. You're probably right. He laughed. They thought they were watching my career end. They never questioned why several longtime clients called me before lunch. Or why respected executives quietly requested private meetings over the following weeks. Within 30 days, I filed the incorporation documents for Carter Crisis Advisory Group LLC. Every legal filing was complete. Every financing agreement was secured. Every strategic partnership had already begun taking shape. My first office occupied only 2 floors. It was enough. Empires rarely begin with headlines. They begin with preparation. They celebrated my resignation. I celebrated my freedom. Building an Empire in Silence Chapter Summary. 18 months after leaving Carter Strategic Holdings, Naomi quietly transforms her small consultancy into a national crisis management powerhouse. While Ethan grows increasingly desperate as major clients disappear, Naomi expands strategically through acquisitions and partnerships that strengthen her hidden position. Her family dismisses her success, but the business world begins recognizing her as a formidable executive leader. Target word count, 850. 18 months after I left Carter Strategic Holdings, I stood inside the headquarters of Carter Crisis Advisory Group and watched the morning skyline stretch across Chicago. The office occupied the top 4 floors of a renovated glass tower overlooking the river. Assistants moved quickly through the hallways while analysts prepared crisis response reports for clients in New York, Atlanta, Houston, and Los Angeles. The company had started with 2 rented floors and a borrowed conference table. Now our annual revenue exceeded $96.4 million. I didn't celebrate the number publicly. I simply read the quarterly report, signed the approval, and placed it back into the folder. Success becomes more powerful when it arrives quietly. My executive assistant entered with a stack of briefing materials. Your 8 o'clock call is ready, she said. The Phoenix Manufacturing account signed the 3-year retention agreement. I nodded. Phoenix had been one of Carter Strategic Holdings' largest clients. They had not announced why they were leaving. They simply transferred their crisis management services to my firm. Any comment from Carter Strategic? I asked. None publicly, she answered. But industry analysts are noticing the pattern. I smiled faintly. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Over the previous year, 7 major clients had left Carter Strategic Holdings and retained my company instead. Every transition had been handled professionally, legally, and without public criticism. I never contacted their clients directly. They contacted me. They had absolutely no idea how carefully I had prepared for that moment. Through the Sentinel Dynamics ownership stake my grandfather had left me, I quietly controlled technology infrastructure that many corporate crisis management systems depended on. Rather than weaponize that advantage, I used it strategically. I acquired companies that strengthened my position. A regulatory compliance firm in Dallas. A cybersecurity response team in Seattle. A media risk consultancy in Washington, D.C. Each acquisition filled a gap Carter Strategic Holdings increasingly struggled to address. Ethan, meanwhile, became more visible in all the wrong ways. Trade publications began reporting delayed responses, inconsistent communication, and rising client dissatisfaction under his leadership. One afternoon, I received a confidential market analysis from our research department. Carter Strategic Holdings had lost $42.7 million in recurring client revenue over 12 months. I read the report once and closed the folder. I felt no triumph. Only confirmation. Strategy does not need anger to be effective. It needs patience. At 2:15 p.m., my phone rang. Brianna. I answered calmly. I saw your little company mentioned in a business article, she said. Congratulations on your small business success. Her tone carried the same polished condescension I had heard since childhood. Thank you. I suppose consulting is a good backup plan. I looked through my office window at the employees working across our operations floor. Backup plans can become primary plans, I replied. She laughed softly. Well, just don't forget where you came from. After we ended the call, I returned to reviewing acquisition proposals. My family still believed my success was temporary. My parents dismissed it as luck. Brianna called it a small business. They thought they were protecting the Carter name by minimizing me. What they didn't know was that financial institutions had already begun comparing my leadership strategy to executives running Fortune 500 companies. The media noticed next. A business magazine published a feature titled, Naomi Carter, The Quiet Force Reshaping Corporate Crisis Management. Another article compared my operational discipline to leaders known for precision and long-term planning. I declined television interviews. I accepted only written interviews where I could discuss systems, accountability, and ethical leadership. Public praise can become a distraction. I preferred leverage. Meanwhile, Ethan grew increasingly desperate. Industry contacts told me he was signing expensive short-term contracts to replace lost clients. He approved aggressive vendor agreements without fully understanding their long-term obligations. One of those vendors happened to be a technology firm I had quietly acquired through a holding company. Ethan signed the contract believing he had secured a critical operational advantage. What he didn't know was that the agreement strengthened my position in multiple future negotiations. I never warned him. I never mocked him. I simply allowed the contract to proceed through proper legal channels. That was the difference between reaction and strategy. Late one evening, Harold Benson visited my office. He studied the illuminated city beyond the windows before turning toward me. Your grandfather would be proud, he said. I looked at the framed incorporation certificate hanging on the wall. I hope he would understand why I chose silence. Harold smiled. He understood something most people never learn. The strongest response to betrayal is building something they cannot control. I considered that for a moment. Outside, traffic moved through the city like streams of white and red light. Inside, my company continued operating with disciplined precision. The trap wasn't closing around Ethan. He had already locked himself inside it. The boardroom where everything changed. Chapter summary. Naomi attends an elite corporate leadership summit where Ethan publicly attacks her reputation before a room filled with powerful witnesses. Instead of arguing, she calmly presents the legal evidence her grandfather left behind. Ethan's arrogance becomes his downfall as he unknowingly incriminates himself, leading to the collapse of his career before the people who once admired him. Target word count, 1,100. The invitation arrived exactly 3 weeks before the annual National Corporate Leadership Summit. More than 500 executives would attend. Fortune 500 CEOs, federal judges, corporate attorneys, institutional investors, financial journalists, government regulators. It wasn't simply another conference. It was where reputations were built or destroyed. When I stepped into my dressing room that morning at 7:10 a.m., I chose my outfit with unusual care. A tailored black power suit, gold buttons, gold cufflinks, simple gold earrings. No unnecessary jewelry. No bright colors. No distractions. It wasn't fashion. It was armor. Every detail reminded me I no longer walked into rooms asking for approval. I walked into them carrying authority. Outside, photographers lined the entrance of the Grand Crescent Hotel as black SUVs delivered executives one after another. Camera flashes illuminated polished marble floors while conversations blended into the soft music echoing through the ballroom. I entered quietly. Several reporters recognized me. Ms. Carter. Congratulations on another record quarter. Will your company expand internationally? I smiled politely. We'll discuss strategy after today's summit. Nothing more. Across the ballroom stood Ethan Caldwell beside my father and Brianna. The moment he noticed me, confidence spread across his face. He still believed appearances determined outcomes. He had absolutely no idea today would become the longest day of his career. At 10 a.m., the executive panel began. The moderator invited industry leaders to discuss corporate governance, ethical leadership, and long-term risk management. When questions opened to the audience, Ethan stood first. I'd like to address something that's been circulating throughout our industry. The room became quiet. He looked directly at me. There are companies building their reputations by copying innovations developed by organizations like ours. Several reporters immediately raised their cameras. Ethan continued. Some executives mistake short-term publicity for genuine leadership. The audience shifted toward me. I remained seated. Calm. He smiled confidently. Naomi, perhaps you'd like to explain how your consulting firm achieved such remarkable growth so quickly. Hundreds of eyes turned toward me. Slowly, I stood. I'd be happy to. I walked toward the presentation table carrying only a slim black portfolio. No dramatic expressions. No anger. No urgency. Harold Benson sat quietly near the front beside 2 senior attorneys. He gave a small nod. I opened the portfolio. Inside rested a sealed evidence envelope. A flash drive. Certified shareholder agreements. Consulting contracts. Independent audit reports. I placed each document neatly onto the conference table. Then I stepped back. I said nothing. The silence lasted almost 15 seconds. For Ethan, silence became unbearable. He laughed. That's it? He looked around the room. Apparently props have replaced qualifications. Several executives chuckled politely. He continued speaking. You can package paperwork however you'd like. It doesn't change reality. Still, I remained silent. The moderator glanced toward me. Ms. Carter? I simply nodded toward Harold. He stood. As legal counsel representing the Carter Family Trust, I request these certified documents be reviewed before further discussion. 3 independent attorneys approached the table. The ballroom became almost completely silent. One attorney carefully opened the shareholder agreement. Another examined the consulting contracts. The third connected the encrypted flash drive to the secured presentation system. Within moments, authenticated corporate emails appeared across the massive projection screen. Board correspondence. Financial approvals. Vendor agreements. Regulatory communications. Each document displayed digital timestamps and verification certificates. Confusion spread across the audience. Ethan frowned. Those records don't prove anything. One attorney adjusted his glasses. They establish ownership. Another spoke calmly. They also establish contractual authority. Before anyone could continue, Ethan interrupted. I approved those consulting expenses because everyone understood how the reporting process worked. His words echoed through the ballroom. One attorney looked up immediately. Mr. Caldwell. But Ethan kept talking. The board authorized reallocating funds through outside vendors. Another executive beside him whispered, Ethan. He ignored the warning. The acquisition numbers had to be adjusted temporarily until quarterly reporting stabilized. The room grew noticeably colder. Every sentence made things worse. He believed he was defending himself. Instead, he was confirming everything contained inside the audit reports. Harold quietly folded his hands. I never interrupted. I never corrected him. Sometimes truth requires no assistance. One federal prosecutor sitting near the back slowly closed his notebook. 2 investigators standing beside the ballroom entrance received a brief radio message. The doors opened. 4 federal investigators entered accompanied by financial enforcement officers. No one spoke. Even the cameras stopped clicking. One investigator approached the conference table. Mr. Ethan Caldwell? His confidence disappeared for the first time. There must be some misunderstanding. The investigator remained calm. We have questions regarding financial disclosures, procurement practices, and federal reporting requirements. Ethan looked desperately toward my father. Dad. The word slipped out before he corrected himself. Chairman Carter. My father couldn't answer. His face had lost all color. Across the room, my mother's hands trembled against the edge of her chair. Brianna stared silently at the projection screen displaying emails she had never known existed. For years they believed status guaranteed security. Now they watched status disappear in real time. One board member quietly removed his company identification badge. Another requested private legal counsel. Journalists hurried toward the exits to file breaking news before competitors. The moderator officially suspended the conference. Harold gathered the remaining documents. You handled that exactly as your grandfather hoped, he whispered. I only followed the evidence. Outside the ballroom, reporters surrounded me. Did you plan this? Are you taking over Carter Strategic Holdings? Do you have a statement? I paused before answering. My focus has always been ethical leadership. Nothing else. No celebration. No insults. No victory speech. Behind me, investigators escorted Ethan through a private hallway away from the cameras. He never looked in my direction. He couldn't. His own words had become stronger than anything I could have said. As I stepped into the afternoon sunlight, I realized something that changed me forever. Real power doesn't come from humiliating your enemies. Real power comes from remaining calm while they expose themselves. I never needed to destroy him. I only needed to let him keep talking. The legacy they never saw coming. Chapter summary. Months after the corporate summit, Ethan faces criminal prosecution while the Carter family's carefully protected reputation collapses. Naomi's business expands across international markets, allowing her to invest in future generations through scholarships and leadership programs. Looking back, she realizes true revenge was never about destroying others, it was about creating a legacy no one could erase. Target word count, 856. Months after the leadership summit, I walked through the London office of Carter Crisis Advisory Group as morning sunlight reflected across the glass walls overlooking the Thames. Our international expansion had officially begun. Chicago, New York, London, Toronto, Johannesburg. 5 offices. More than 300 employees. Annual revenue had surpassed 148.9 million, but the number no longer impressed me as much as the people behind it. The company had become something larger than I had ever imagined. It had become proof. Proof that quiet determination could outlast public humiliation. My assistant handed me the latest industry briefing before our executive meeting. The federal case was updated this morning. I opened the report without emotion. Ethan Caldwell had been formally charged with multiple counts of securities fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, and falsifying corporate disclosures. Several former board members accepted settlement agreements in exchange for cooperation. His financial assets had been frozen. His luxury condominium was listed for sale. The newspapers called it one of the largest corporate governance scandals of the decade. I closed the folder. I felt no satisfaction. Justice and revenge are not the same thing. Justice belongs to the law. Revenge belongs to anger. I had chosen something different. Creation. Across town, another headline quietly appeared. Leonard Carter resigns as chairman following board vote. My father had spent decades protecting his reputation. In a single afternoon, the board decided reputation alone could no longer protect the company. He lost the position he valued more than almost anything else. Not because I fought him. Because the truth finally reached the people responsible for governance. My mother experienced a different kind of loss. For years, charity galas, private clubs, and exclusive fundraising dinners had defined her identity. The invitations gradually stopped arriving. People who once competed for her attention suddenly remembered other commitments. Status had abandoned her as quickly as it had once embraced her. That was the nature of appearances. They remain loyal only while they remain useful. Brianna called me unexpectedly one evening. Her voice sounded quieter than I remembered. I'm interviewing next week. I'm glad to hear that. She hesitated. No one seems interested in my last title anymore. I remained silent. She continued. They keep asking what I actually accomplished. For the first time in our lives, we shared the same understanding. Titles can open doors. Only competence keeps them open. I hope it goes well, I answered sincerely. So do I. When the call ended, I wished her no harm. Life had already become a better teacher than I ever could. My own attention remained focused elsewhere. Every year, my company established 10 full scholarships for young Black women pursuing degrees in finance, law, cybersecurity, and corporate leadership. The first scholarship carried my grandfather's name. Harold Benson attended the ceremony beside me. He watched the students with quiet pride. Your grandfather believed wealth should create opportunities. I finally understand what he meant. We also launched leadership fellowships for entrepreneurs who had experienced discrimination, workplace bias, or professional retaliation. Many reminded me of myself. Quiet. Brilliant. Often overlooked. I told every participant the same thing. Never measure your future by someone else's opinion of your worth. Those words became the foundation of our leadership program. Sometimes I visited our training sessions without announcing who I was. I preferred listening. One young woman approached me after a workshop. I almost quit after being passed over for promotion. I smiled gently. So did I. What changed your mind? I looked around the room filled with determined faces. I stopped asking people to recognize my value. I decided to build something they couldn't ignore. She smiled through tears. Thank you. As she walked away, I realized my story no longer belonged only to me. It belonged to everyone who had ever been underestimated. Everyone who had ever been told they weren't enough. Everyone who had quietly carried disappointment while refusing to surrender dignity. Looking back now, I understand something I couldn't see inside that boardroom years ago. The greatest revenge is never taking someone else's success. The greatest revenge is building your own. If you're listening to my story today, remember this. Someone may overlook your talent. Someone may underestimate your intelligence. Someone may choose appearances over character. Let them. Their decision does not define your future. Your response does. Because rejection is often the foundation beneath extraordinary success. The promotion they denied me built the empire they could never take away.